The Exelther Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, its war fleets crushing civilizations with ruthless efficiency. No species had ever posed a true threat. Their war doctrine was simple: expand, dominate, and annihilate any who resisted. And for a long time, it worked. But deep within the Dominion's outer territories, in a system thought to be secure, an urgent alarm blared across the command stations of Outpost Zorkath 7. The sensors had picked up something: a ship moving fast, cutting through the void like a silent predator. At first, the officers dismissed it as a malfunction. No known enemy could penetrate Dominion space without triggering multiple security layers. Yet, when the scanners adjusted and locked onto the vessel, panic spread like wildfire. The ship was human. Admiral Varesh stood frozen as he stared at the holographic display. He had read reports about humanity before, dismissed them as exaggerated myths created by weaker species. According to official intelligence, the humans were nothing more than a minor species in a distant sector, struggling to survive against more advanced galactic empires. But the readings on the screen told a different story. The ship was larger than expected, sleek and armored with an unknown alloy that deflected even the most advanced scans. It carried weapon signatures that Dominion technology could not identify, energy readings that fluctuated as if the warship was hiding its true potential. And yet, it moved with confidence, as if it feared nothing. It was not lost. It was here on purpose. The control room filled with hushed whispers as officers exchanged uneasy glances. Varesh snapped out of his shock and barked an order. "Open a channel. Demand identification." The transmission was sent, but the human warship did not respond. It drifted forward, silent and unwavering. That silence was what disturbed Varesh the most. Every species, when confronted with a Dominion patrol, either fled or begged for mercy. But this ship did neither. It simply approached, unbothered by the defenses that should have stopped it long before now. It was as if the humans wanted to be seen. "Send a warning to High Command," Varesh ordered, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "And scramble the fleet. I want this thing surrounded before it gets any further." His officers hesitated. It was rare to hear uncertainty from their admiral. The Dominion had encountered thousands of enemy ships before. None had ever made him hesitate. But something about this human warship felt different. Dangerous.access, the Dominion's response force mobilized. The scanners continued analyzing the ship. The data was impossible to ignore. The HFY Vengeance, as the human vessel was identified, was unlike anything the Dominion had faced. Its structure suggested speed and power, built for both survival and destruction. But what truly unsettled the officers was the ship's heat signature. It was cold. Too cold. A warship of that size should have been radiating energy, its reactor pulsing with activity. Instead, it barely registered, as if it were a ghost, a predator lurking in the shadows of deep space, waiting for the right moment to strike. Varesh clenched his jaw as new data streamed in. "How did they get this close?" he muttered. It was a question no one could answer. The Dominion's security systems were supposed to be impenetrable. The fact that this single human warship had reached the edge of a major outpost without triggering alarms meant only one thing. The humans had been preparing for this. They had studied Dominion defenses, learned their weaknesses, and exploited them with terrifying precision. And if a single warship could do this, what else were they hiding? Outside the outpost, the stars lit up as the Dominion fleet arrived. 10 warships took formation, surrounding the intruder. Their weapons powered up, shields flaring as they locked onto their target. A transmission was sent again, this time a direct demand for surrender. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, without warning, the Vengeance moved. It wasn't an attack, not yet. But the way it repositioned itself, sliding effortlessly between the Dominion ships, felt unnatural, as if it were testing them. Varesh's fingers tightened around the command console. He had seen countless battles, but never had he witnessed an enemy act with such eerie calm. Most ships, when surrounded, tried to break formation or flee. This one simply observed, waiting, calculating. like a predator studying its prey. A single pulse echoed from the human warship, not a weapon, but an energy surge, a warning. It spread through the Dominion fleet, disrupting sensors and scrambling targeting systems for a brief moment. The Dominion officers tensed. This was no malfunction. It was a message, and Varish understood it all too well. The humans were letting them know that if they wanted war, they would get one. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Varesh felt something he never thought possible: fear. The Dominion fleet floated in perfect formation. A dozen Excelsior battleships, each armed with enough firepower to devastate a planet. Yet, despite their overwhelming numbers, a strange unease settled over the Dominion commanders. The HFY Vengeance did not move in fear. It did not attempt to communicate. It simply hovered in the void, untouched by the growing tension. The silence was unnatural. Every species that had ever encountered the Dominion either fled or tried to negotiate. But this human warship refused to do either. It remained still, waiting, as if it had already predicted every possible response the Dominion could make. Admiral Varesh stood rigid in the command center of his flagship, his reptilian eyes fixed on the massive display before him. The human warship's design was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its dark, angular hull absorbed the distant starlight, making it appear like a shadow against the vastness of space. The energy readings coming from it were inconsistent, shifting erratically, as if the ship itself was alive. Dominion scanners struggled to lock onto its exact structure, as if something within its design defied detection. This was no ordinary vessel. It was built for a purpose far beyond simple warfare. It was hunting something, and Varesh was beginning to fear that the prey it sought was them. He turned toward his officers, their usual arrogance replaced by quiet uncertainty. "Have they responded?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, Admiral," one of the technicians replied, voice tight with nervousness. "We've sent multiple demands for identification." The humans remained silent. Varesh exhaled slowly. Silence was not a good sign. Silence meant confidence. It meant control. He had seen this behavior before, not from enemies, but from the Dominion's own elite hunters. The Dominion often sent highly trained predators to exterminate troublesome species, and they always behaved the same way. They stalked, they observed, and then, without warning, they struck. And now, for the first time, the Dominion itself was being hunted. "Prepare a warning shot," Varesh commanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Fire a plasma round past their bow. Let them know they are surrounded." A moment later, one of the Dominion warships fired. A searing bolt of blue plasma streaked across the void, passing just meters from the human ship's forward section. The Dominion officers watched carefully, waiting for a reaction. Any reaction. But the Vengeance did not move. A ripple of unease spread through the command center. Any other species would have responded by now. They would have tried to explain themselves, retaliate, or at the very least, acknowledge the warning. But the human warship did nothing. It simply remained there, a lifeless shadow drifting through space. Then, without any visible activation, the Dominion's long-range sensors began to fail. The readings on the human vessel flickered, data vanishing and reappearing in ways that made no sense. Communications suffered interference. Dominion ships attempted to recalibrate their targeting systems, but something was scrambling their signals. The entire fleet, for the first time in its long history, was blind. A young officer's voice broke the silence, his panic barely contained. "Sir, I think they're jamming us." Varesh clenched his jaw. Jamming? No species in the galaxy had ever been able to disrupt Dominion systems so easily. Their technology was centuries ahead of most civilizations. And yet, this single human warship had done it without even firing a shot. A cold realization settled over him. The humans were testing them. They had already calculated the Dominion's responses, and now they were proving a point. They were showing that they could disable a fleet without even engaging in battle. For the first time, a thought crept into Varesh's mind: what if this was not the strongest weapon humanity possessed? What if this was merely the beginning? The other Dominion captains began to grow impatient. Their pride refused to accept the idea that they were being toyed with. One of them, a particularly aggressive warlord named HFY, sent out an open broadcast. Enough of this nonsense. If you will not speak, then you will burn. Before Varesh could stop him, Xylix's ship fired a full barrage of torpedoes. The glowing projectiles streaked toward the Vengeance, cutting through the darkness with deadly precision. And yet, in the fraction of a second before impact, the human warship vanished. Not in an explosion. Not in a burst of light. It simply disappeared. The torpedoes struck only empty space. The Excelsior officers froze in horror. The Vengeance had never been there at all. A shuddering realization settled into the room. The human ship had been playing with them. It had appeared on their sensors, allowed them to scan it, let them believe they were in control, but the entire time, it had been an illusion. A ghost. A message. And then, without warning, the Vengeance reappeared directly behind HFY's ship. In an instant, everything changed. The human warship moved with terrifying speed, positioning itself at point-blank range. Xy's crew barely had time to react before a single, concentrated energy beam sliced through their shields like paper. The Dominion battleship split in half, its remains drifting in the void, silent and lifeless. The rest of the fleet watched in stunned silence. One shot. One perfect, calculated shot. It was not a random attack. It was a demonstration. A warning. A single human warship had destroyed one of their strongest battleships in mere seconds. And still, it did not speak. Varesh's grip tightened on the console. The silence was worse than any threat. The message was clear: they were not ready for this enemy. And if humanity had sent one warship, there was only one terrifying question left to ask: how many more were coming? Admiral Varesh stood in silence as the wreckage of HFY's battleship drifted through the void. The Dominion fleet, once a symbol of terror and absolute power, had not moved since the attack. Not a single ship dared to engage. Not a single weapon fired. Fear clung to the command deck like a suffocating mist. The HFY Vengeance remained motionless, its dark hull reflecting nothing, as if it were part of space itself. No celebration. No communication. No demands. Just silence. And yet, that silence spoke louder than any war cry. It was the silence of absolute control. The Dominion had always believed in brute force, in overwhelming their enemies through superior numbers and firepower. But now, faced with this human warship, their tactics felt primitive, their understanding of battle outdated. The humans were not fighting for survival. They were fighting for domination. Varesh had spent decades studying warfare, commanding fleets that crushed rebellions and conquered entire worlds. But he had never encountered anything like this. The Vengeance did not fight with the reckless aggression of lesser species. It did not move with desperation or fear. Instead, it fought with a terrifying precision, as if every move had already been calculated, every shot already decided long before the battle began. It was not just winning, it was demonstrating a doctrine that the Dominion had never encountered before. The human war doctrine. And it was unlike anything in the galaxy. A low hum filled the command deck as officers scrambled to regain control of the failing systems. Their scanners were still malfunctioning, their weapons struggling to lock onto the target. The human warship had not only destroyed their strongest battleship with a single shot, but it had crippled their ability to fight back without even attacking again. This was psychological warfare at its peak. The Dominion had never needed strategy before. They simply overwhelmed their enemies through sheer power. But now, power was meaningless. The humans were proving that brute strength was nothing against superior tactics, precision, and technology. A transmission request blinked on the screen. Not from the Vengeance, but from High Command. Varesh hesitated before answering. The holographic form of Overlord Krelzor, Supreme Commander of the Dominion's fleets, appeared before him. His scaled face twisted in anger. Admiral Varesh, Krelzor's voice was sharp, accusing. Why has our fleet not destroyed the intruder? Varesh clenched his fists. Because we can't! But he dared not say those words. Instead, he carefully chose his response. Overlord, we have encountered an anomaly. He turned to the display, pointing at the human ship. This vessel is not like the others. It fights differently. It disables rather than destroys. It predicts our moves before we make them. I have never seen warfare like this. Krelzor's expression darkened. A single ship is holding our forces hostage? Do you understand how pathetic that sounds? He bared his fangs in disgust. Destroy it immediately. Varesh opened his mouth to argue, but before he could respond, the Vengeance moved. Not away, not in retreat, but forward. Directly toward the flagship. Varesh's breath caught in his throat. No enemy had ever dared to advance toward the command ship of a Dominion fleet, not when surrounded, not when outnumbered. But the Vengeance did not hesitate. It did not maneuver to evade attacks. It charged head-on as if nothing in the universe could stop it. The Dominion fleet panicked. Warships broke formation, captains shouting over the comms in confusion. It's coming right at us. What do we do? It's just one ship. Fire, torpedoes streaked through space, energy beams cutting across the void. But as the firestorm engulfed the Vengeance, something impossible happened. The projectiles vanished. No explosions, no impacts, just pure nothingness. The Dominion's most advanced weaponry, capable of destroying moons, simply ceased to exist before it could reach the target. The command deck filled with horrified silence. They were fighting something beyond their understanding. The Vengeance continued its approach, closing the distance in seconds. Then, for the first time, it broadcast a message not in words, not in any known Dominion language, but in a series of calculated pulses that infiltrated every system, every screen. It was a display of data records of past battles, strategic simulations, comparisons of Dominion warfare against human tactics. It showed every weakness in their fleet formations, every flaw in their combat doctrine. It was a lesson. The Dominion had always fought through intimidation. But humanity? Humanity fought through absolute control. The message ended with a final warning, translated directly into Dominion speech. You are fighting the wrong war. Withdraw or be erased. Varesh felt cold. This was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The humans had already decided the outcome of this battle. They had given the Dominion a choice to leave or to be destroyed. And Varesh knew the truth: they could wipe us out if they wanted to. Overlord Krelzor, still connected to the transmission, snarled. This is unacceptable. Destroy that ship, Varesh, or I will destroy you. But Varesh did not respond. He watched as the fleet trembled in uncertainty. For the first time in Dominion history, their war doctrine had failed. Their enemy did not fear them. Their enemy did not run. Their enemy did not even consider them a challenge. And the worst part? This was only one human warship. If this was a scouting vessel, what kind of force did the humans truly possess? The realization struck him like a blade. The Dominion was not the apex predator of the galaxy. Humanity was. And today, the humans had delivered a message that the Dominion would never forget. Varesh turned to his officers. Order a full retreat. His voice was quiet but firm. The bridge crew stared at him in disbelief, but he did not repeat himself. The decision had been made. They could either flee now or be annihilated. The Overlord's voice thundered through the comms. Varesh, I command you, Varesh, cut the transmission. The time for arrogance was over. The time for war was over. A new power had arrived in the galaxy, and the Dominion would never be the same again. The battlefield was silent for a moment, a terrifying stillness before the storm. The Dominion fleet had begun its retreat, but not all of them had accepted the reality of their defeat. A handful of warships still lingered, their captains unwilling to believe that a single human warship had brought their armada to its knees. These commanders, arrogant and desperate, refused to run. They still believed in the Dominion's strength. They still believed that raw power could crush this lone enemy. And so, in one final act of defiance, they chose to fight. The HSS Vengeance did not move as the 6 remaining Dominion warships repositioned themselves. These were battle-hardened ships, each one responsible for the destruction of entire civilizations. Their weapons powered up, their targeting systems locked onto the Vengeance's hull. This time, they would not hold back. They would unleash everything they had all at once, leaving nothing but wreckage in the void. Admiral Varesh, still on his flagship, watched in silence. He had already given the order to retreat, but these captains had refused. They still clung to the old ways, believing that war was about dominance, about intimidation. They did not understand the truth. Humanity did not fight wars the way the Dominion did. Humanity did not rely on fear. They did not rely on brute force. They fought with purpose. The first barrage was unleashed a storm of plasma torpedoes, particle beams, and high-energy lances, each one capable of reducing a warship to molten debris. The firestorm illuminated the darkness of space, a wall of destruction closing in on the human vessel. And then, in an instant, the battlefield became hell itself. The Vengeance did not evade. It did not activate any defensive barriers. It let the weapons come. And just before impact, the ship's hull came alive. It burned with a sudden, blinding energy, a golden, searing glow that seemed to absorb the very essence of the attack. The plasma rounds never exploded. The energy beams never reached their target. The firestorm was swallowed whole, its power consumed by something far beyond Dominion understanding. The Vengeance had turned their own weapons into fuel, and then it answered. A single shot, not a barrage, not an overwhelming counterattack. Just one precise beam, fired from the heart of the Vengeance, cutting through the void with terrifying speed. It did not miss. The first Dominion warship was struck at its core. There was no explosion, no debris scattering into the void, only a moment of pure, consuming light. And then, nothing. The warship had simply ceased to exist. Panic spread through the remaining captains. They scrambled to reposition, to understand what had just happened. But the Vengeance did not give them time. Another beam fired. Another ship vanished. The third warship tried to flee, but before its engines could fully engage, a controlled burst from the human vessel ripped straight through its hull, reducing it to fragments. 3 ships. 3 perfectly executed eliminations. The remaining Dominion captains begged for orders. They called out to their overlord, to Admiral Varesh, to anyone who could tell them what to do. But there were no orders. There were no commands that could save them. The Vengeance was not destroying them out of necessity. It was not wiping them out because it had to. It was sending a message. The final 3 ships hesitated, their weapons still primed, but their resolve now shaken. And then, at last, the human warship did something it had never done before. IT spoke. A deep transmission cut through all Dominion channels, reaching not only the warships still in battle, but every fleet, every station, every listening post across the sector. The voice was calm, cold, and undeniable. This is your final warning. The words sent a chill through every Dominion officer who heard them. There was no threat, no arrogance. Just a simple statement of fact. The last 3 warships finally made their choice. They turned away, engines burning at maximum speed as they fled toward the retreating fleet. They did not fire again. They did not look back. They ran, leaving behind only the remains of their fallen. And the Vengeance watched. Admiral Varesh exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his defeat press down on him. This was not just a loss. This was a lesson. The Dominion, once the unchallenged ruler of the stars, had been humbled in a way no species had ever dared to challenge them before. The humans had sent their message. Not through words, not through negotiations, but through fire. And the galaxy had no choice but to listen. The Dominion High Council sat in silence. The vast chamber, once a place of power where war strategies were decided and entire civilizations were condemned to destruction, now felt suffocating. A cold tension hung in the air as if the very foundation of their rule had been shattered. Because it had. The news had arrived in fragments, each report more horrifying than the last. A single human warship had forced an entire Dominion fleet into retreat. It had not just defeated them, it had humiliated them. The high generals had reviewed the battle footage over and over again, trying to make sense of what had happened. It made no difference. The results remained the same. The Dominion's greatest war doctrine had failed. Overlord Krelzor stood at the head of the chamber, his claws gripping the edge of the war table. His scaled face, once full of arrogance, now twitched with restrained fury. He had never known fear before. The Dominion had never needed to fear anything, but now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to face something beyond his control. The humans had rewritten the rules of war. He turned his gaze toward the council members, his voice low and filled with anger. "Explain," he commanded. No one spoke. No one could. Admiral Varesh, the only surviving fleet commander from the battle, stood rigidly at attention. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of something he wished he could deny. "The humans do not fight like us," he said. "They do not rely on brute force. They do not seek destruction for the sake of dominance. They fight to control the battlefield before the first shot is even fired." He turned his gaze to the holographic projection of the HFY Vengeance. They fight with knowledge, with precision, with an understanding of war that surpasses ours in ways we never imagined. Krelzor's fangs bared in frustration. "Are you telling me a single human ship was able to outmaneuver and outgun the most powerful fleet in the galaxy?" Varesh exhaled slowly. "No, Overlord. I'm telling you they did not need to." His eyes darkened, because the war was already over before it even began. A hush fell over the chamber. The words carried a weight that no one wanted to acknowledge. The Dominion had always believed they were superior. They had always crushed opposition through sheer firepower, through overwhelming numbers, through the merciless destruction of any who resisted them. But the humans, they had not feared the Dominion's strength. They had studied it, predicted it, exploited it. And then, with a single warship, they had proven that the Dominion's power was nothing but an illusion. The Overlord slammed his fist against the table, the impact echoing through the room. "This cannot stand. We will not cower before these creatures. We will raise a new armada. We will bring fire to their worlds and burn their fleets from the stars." His voice was a snarl, but there was something beneath it that none dared to mention. Doubt. Varesh did not flinch. "And what if they have more ships like the Vengeance?" His voice was cold, unshaken. "What if this was just a warning? What if humanity has already planned for the war we want to start?" His words sent an eerie chill through the chamber. That was the greatest horror of all. The Dominion did not know. They had ruled through certainty, through absolute control. But now, against this unknown enemy, they were blind. What else did the humans have? Was the Vengeance truly an anomaly? Or was it just a scout, a glimpse of the true force humanity could unleash? The thought was enough to make even the most hardened generals hesitate. The silence was broken by a sudden transmission alert. A Dominion outpost near the outer sectors had detected a fleet approaching at high speed. The council members tensed. More humans? More warships? The Overlord immediately commanded the transmission to be displayed. The holographic feed flickered to life, revealing a Dominion officer, his face stricken with fear. "Overlord!" His voice shook. We static interrupted him for a moment. When his face reappeared, his next words sent a chill through everyone present. "They are here." Krelzor leaned forward. "Who is here?" But before the officer could respond, a new voice cut through the transmission. Cold. Precise. Human. "We warned you." The feed died. The chamber was deathly quiet. Every Dominion leader, every war strategist, every general in the room felt the same thing at that moment: dread. Varesh spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "The war has changed." His claws tightened at his sides. "And we are no longer the ones in control." The Dominion had spent centuries as the galaxy's greatest conquerors. But now, the balance of power had shifted. The humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again.